So the day before the fire, my background is architecture, and I've had my own design firm called Dreamers and Doers for the last decade or so. And I was working, if you can believe it, on a pickleball project in Tampa, outside of Tampa, Florida. And it was just wrapping up.
I can believe it.
Yes.
But wow.
Yeah. The name of this place, I don't think it ever opened. I was just doing concept work for it, called Blazing Paddles.
Oh, clever.
Yeah.
Not mad about that. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the day of the fire, I was evacuated. I didn't lose my home, but I lived close by. And I found out that a couple of my daughters, I have two daughters, and a couple of my daughters had teachers that lived in Altadena and had lost their homes. And I hadn't really thought about how I could get involved from an architectural perspective. I really just wanted to help out the people that I knew and ask them what they needed from just, a personal standpoint. Just check in with them, see how they were doing. We put together some big gift baskets for the teachers and was able to drop them off and say hi. And one of the teachers, my daughter's kindergarten teacher, who had lost his home, he said, "You're an architect. I have all these questions." He was already starting to process it. And this was probably a week after the fire. He was already starting to process it and understand it. And it turned out he had always been around architecture. His sister was an interior designer. His mother was an architect as well. So it was something on his mind. And I was like, "How are you thinking about this?" He just lost this beautiful set of vintage motorcycles in the fire. And they literally had the aluminum wheels had literally melted into pools on the driveway. And he was, telling me the story, and I was just in shock. So it really didn't hit me until probably another week later, and I followed up with him, and I was like, I have a skill set, and I have a passion for helping people. I would love to help you in any possible way. And so I reached out to another teacher that lost her home, and she was telling me about her home. We had a conversation outside the school, and she said, "I had this beautiful home. It was an English cottage home. They were called the Janes Cottages." And I had never heard of these before. And she said, "If you really want to understand it, we've started this group of other people that also had Janes Cottages that want to just talk to each other." And it started out as more of a support group. And I came on there just to listen, to find out more about what a Janes Cottage was. And in the room was an architect that was essentially presenting what the Janes Cottage history was, who E.P. Janes was that developed these homes. And it turned out that these homes were about to turn exactly 100 years old in May last year. So the community had already formed a group about planning that 100-year anniversary, and they were going to have a block party, and they were going to, come together and celebrate. But that turned into, after the fire, into more of a support situation where they just wanted to talk about it, and they started talking about coming back and bringing Janes back and what was so special about them. So very quickly, I got an education on a Janes Cottage, and I got to meet this other architect, Tim. And so I followed up with Tim, and we started talking about Janes Cottages, why they were special. But we also started talking about, okay, how do you bring a whole group of historic homes back, because everyone's going to want to build back. They love their Janes. How can we bring it back? And that's something that's very difficult in the architectural world to say, there's historic architecture. It was built in a certain time period in a certain way. How do you be authentic to the details of that? And how do you bring that back in modern times and start to consider things that we were thinking about as far as like fire resiliency and modernization and solar panels and zone zero and all these things that we started to fold into it. So we started Altadena Collective with the hopes of bringing back the character and the qualities and the specialness that existed within the community, and bring the people back that had lost their homes. And what that turned into was this kind of ever-growing system of trying to figure out solutions for a particular group of people going through a unique experience. And I'm kind of sugarcoating it all, but essentially survivors, disaster survivors, we found out very early on, as they were going through what they're going through, the trauma that they were going through had a very unique set of parameters that we needed to address, that were outside of the typical scope of me as an architect and how I work with clients and how I design a building was very different. And rather than try to fit the survivors into that box, we decided very early on that we were going to fit our box around their problems, so that it was a new solution. And we kept on finding different problems and saying, okay, how should we address these different problems? And it began to expand and expand. And since then, we've started Collective OR, which is an owner representation nonprofit organization that helps people guide them back through the rebuilding process. We've worked with the commercial districts, and there's another nonprofit. They're called Altadena Village, that we've been volunteering for and integral in bringing the commercial side of it, because once we figured out the residential side of things, then we noticed that the people that were struggling even more were these owner occupants in the commercial corridors of Altadena that wanted to return, but had even larger insurance gaps and even more complicated rebuild issues and construction costs and layers of bureaucracy that they had to deal with. So what we found was that we felt we had the expertise to help the entire community. What was the best way that we could rise up to the occasion and insert ourselves where people needed it? And what we found is, by listening, people would tell us, it's a crazy idea. Yeah. It's a novel idea.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
But it's so effective. Yeah. I know. It turns out that fire survivors are grown and fire communities are grown, and they may have a lot of questions, but by listening to their questions and listening to their concerns, you actually get all the research and development that you need. And I don't know why the larger disaster community is often very reluctant to do that. They're like, no, we know all the answers. So you just sit back, and we're going to, what you said exactly, we're going to fit you into our box, and we're not going to try to build the box around you according to what you've told us that you actually need. I argue that the way you're doing it is more efficient. Is it harder sometimes? Sure, because you have to deal with people's emotions and expectations and their trauma and their anger. But that does dissipate. But rebuilding a community is long. Yeah. And so why not get the best information out the front? So I want to go back for a second, because I love what you said. You literally gave me goosebumps, because I live for this kind of stuff, is understanding the process that you were going to be dealing with clients who are different from the clients you had previously worked with. Not all architects or home builders are willing to work with fire survivors because they cannot walk through the emotional side of it, which is absolutely required. Can you please talk to people, especially if people are listening and they've never had a disaster, or what was that process like for you? It's so important.
It was, we opened up an office last March, and we specifically wanted a storefront in the community where people could come in and sit down at a big table, and anytime they wanted to, they could come in and ask questions and have a consultation of some sort where we could pass along information. And we had people in all kind of just every emotional state. People would come in, tears in their eyes. People would come in, their eyes were glazed over with, absolute paralysis. Some people were in ecstatic joy, like they were, it was really interesting to see how people were processing the trauma of it. but they all knew that they needed to rebuild. So they had a lot of bravery in just kind of taking those first steps of saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know. I've never built a house before. I've never gone through a construction process. I'm going to spend more money than probably I've ever spent in my life on the reconstruction. I don't know what the next step is because the systems in place don't prepare you and don't provide the guidance that you need. So everyone was out on their own and very vulnerable and very raw, and to experience that level of emotion. I was used to working with people that were creating a project on their own because that's what they wanted to do. It was a business, it was a house, hotel, other experience. These are people that were there not out of choice. And I think that by finding ways to meet them and give them the information and guide them, then what we quickly learned is that dignity is a huge part of the recovery process. And how could we bring dignity back into that process and make it and give them the information when they were ready for it, rather than throw them a lot of information. And early on, we didn't want to send people on wild goose chases, treasure hunts to get information, here, over here, because that was another point where they would shut them down or stop them from moving forward. So we wanted to bring all the information to one place and all the expertise into one place to kind of keep them going and give them hope.